It's really great to be here. I thank everybody for hanging in and thank all of you who've been putting this together. I know what a job it is. I've worked with Tony for several years and Clyde and my friend here. I see all of you. I've seen you before, and thank you, all of you. When I was really little, my mother, I realize now that my mother was training me to be an activist, and I didn't know it then. But she'd take me to meetings when they were fighting termination on my reservation, and all the way home after talking with the elders, she'd brief me. And she'd say, that's all your land there. Of course, Canada and Colville land. Of course, they say it's theirs, but that's all your land. So I'd remember that, and then she'd say, my auntie said, you're St. Ives, Arrow Lakes, don't ever forget that. That's all your land up there in British Columbia. Of course, they lied and they said it's theirs, but that's yours. Don't you ever forget that. So the two of them were getting me ready to be an activist. And so I'd go out and play. I'd think, well, I'm too little to deal with this now, but when I get bigger, I'm going to start asking some questions. And I'm going to confront Canada someday about that lie and that theft. Well, that didn't happen until 1989, but before that, the Klamaths were terminated, the Menominees it was in the process of terminating them, and they had already sent a man up to Colville, where I'm from, in Washington State, to begin termination then. And that's when the relocation period was coming into play. There were already people down here, but a lot of us young people were sent to the cities, like my sister just told about. And I came down in '66 and studied, of all things, the nearest thing to art was fashion designing, and I made a lot of friends, and I was just about finished. I was working on Market Street as a fashion designer's assistant when my babysitter called and told me, oh, I thought it was going to be tough. Told me my little daughter died. She was 3. It was encephalitis, and it affected her brain. And she went into convulsions and died an hour after I left her at the babysitter's. So I quit my job and everything, and they put my son, who was a year older than Julie, in the hospital because they had thought it might be meningitis. And I took my daughter home and buried her and came back and got my son and my other things. And went home, tried a reconciliation with the kid's dad. It didn't work. And I had another daughter. When she was a year old, I left him for good. And kind of wandered around and lost, no place to go. And I too spent some time doing some in-depth study in that alcohol. But I met people. I heard Leonard Crodog's name, and I felt so good because he was one of the people who helped teach me. I see the sign, American Indian Movement. It brings back memories. I got in trouble in Spokane, and a friend of mine, a babysitter, called me when she was watching my children, and she told me that there was a neighbor that was a peeping Tom and a prowler and a child molester. She just had found out and asked me to bring my gun, let her use my gun. She knew I had one because I was going to sell it. And I tried to get her to leave the house and come over to my house. And she wouldn't do it. The police were telling her it's okay to get a gun. But it's the worst thing you can do to leave your house. You know, you come down on Monday, this was a Friday, you come down on Monday and file a complaint and we'll arrest him. So it's a long story that I'm writing about because I learned a lot in that time, from that time on, when at 5 o'clock in the morning I shot and killed who I thought was a child molester who came into that house with my babysitters. And I went to court, and it lasted for 7 years litigation, but 12 years from beginning to end. I All I did in that whole time was the first 3 days in jail. And that's pretty awesome now that I think about it. There's a lot of healing that had to be done. People get put in prison. I understand there was a man on Alcatraz for a lesser crime than taking a life. And I think there was a man who was pardoned finally after several years for a much, much lesser crime. And there are Indian men and women, I do a lot of prison work, going in and out of the prisons for, what, perjury, robbery, drunkenness, whatever, you know, lesser crimes. So I understand the prison work, what prisoners are all about. Fortunately for me, I met people like Leonard Croddock, and the American Indian movement was right there. I told my sisters I have to fight this case. If I don't, these white people are going to put me in prison, and the Creator gave me those children to take care of. I had my 2 other children, and I can't go to prison because they'll put them in white foster home. So we started a pageant of Indian arts. I used my talent that I learned in fashion designing school, and we made contemporary Indian clothing based from traditional concept. We used our teenage models, and they danced to music by Exit and Paul Ortega, and I'm telling my age now. And they'd come out and dance to the music. It was really great, and people loved our clothing, and they wanted to buy them right up on the spot. And of course, we didn't have the money to reproduce. But in the meantime, I got over my shyness of getting up in front of an audience, because I'd read the commentary cards as the models would come out dancing with their outfits, their ensembles. And so I was Steve Robidoux and Rocky Duenas knew about my case, and they invited me to Missoula, Montana, to the university to speak. They said, yeah, we can fit you in. We're having an event there, and Buffy St. Marie's going to be there. So I spoke a little bit about my case, and Buffy was standing on the side of the stage, and when I got done and I went back there, she scribbled out I thought she was writing her address down, but it was a check. And she said, you take this $300 and you go down to California and meet my publicist, Karen Shearer, and she'll help you. You do it now. You do it, she'll help you. I said, okay, so I went down there. Karen Shearer wrote the first story, and that's the very most important thing, the first fact sheet. When you're coordinating a defense committee or trying to help somebody, as I learned. And that 5 pages Karen did a superb job of sending it out to all the feminist organizations, and the straight press, the liberal press, the underground press, every contact she had. And they started, the women started comparing my case to Joanne Little, who was fighting a murder charge back in the South, and Inez Garcia here in California, who was fighting a murder charge. So that built up the momentum and the publicity, the support in the women's movement, and then of course AIM, people like Clyde and Dennis and Bill Wapapaw and John Trudell, all of Madonna Thunderhawk, Lorelei Means, all of them, they all supported me. And I began to get strong again, and Floyd Westerman was there from the very beginning, from day 1 of the trial. The first day of my trial was the day, May 7th, 1973, and I think that people moved out of Wounded Knee on May 8th, I'm not sure, May 7th or May 8th. But you know what, I was brought into trial right at that time, and I wonder how many other people were at that time prosecuted because they were Indian, because of what the publicity did to shed a bad light about Indians at that time. And so I was convicted on Mother's Day, May 13th, 1973, for murder and assault and the use of a deadly weapon. And the man who died was a child molester. The man, he had a companion, and I don't remember it, but I guess I shot him in the shoulder, and that's where the assault charge came from.